Okay, so we said water safety is a dry subject, or it should be. Joking aside, here comes John F McDermott, good friend of mine from Chicago, all the way from Chicago, sharing his knowledge, his understanding, and his deliberation on the subject, health and safety. Yes, it's a dry subject. Yes, it's a dusty old subject, and it's a subject that we don't really pay too much attention to, and perhaps we should. After all, if you're a boat captain, you could find yourself responsible for yourself and 21 other people, 21 other souls on the boat when you go out. And it's well worth taking a bit of time to think about that. And as John would say, assessing the various obvious hazards and mitigating the risk. It's not about beating yourself up with a dusty old tome of health and safety procedures and precautions and never going out on the boat. It's recognising the risks and putting in place sensible, proportionate, pragmatic, understandable procedures that people can work to and keep themselves that much safer, that much healthier, and look after their welfare. The host, take it away.
All right, great. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, everybody, for being here today. I think we're going to have a really exciting conversation. And I'd like to make it a little bit more of a discussion for the group, just as we're going through some content. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen here. The slide I want is, where is it? Where did my person? Here it is. Okay, bear with me 1 second while I get that opened up for everybody. There we go. I think we see a picture. I want to get to my presentation, which is here, and we're going to go. Bear with me 1 second while we go to you present. Okay.
Got it.
Got it. Here we go. Excellent. Excellent. Good. So I'm fortunate enough to actually have a very strong safety partner, Kathy Lawson, who has a background working at the Nestle Corporation in as a safety manager for her site. And so we both play off one another quite a bit because I wear a couple of hats, as Randy knows. Sometimes I wear my coaching hat. Sometimes I wear the safety hat, which I'll wear today. But it's very difficult to sometimes separate if you're doing both coaching and safety at the same time. So having somebody like Kathy as a partner has been wonderful because we can get real clear on when I'm coach and when Kathy is actually when I'm doing safety or when we're doing safety together. So I always think it's kind of interesting to just remind everybody, obviously we put 22 people in a dragon boat. The average dragon boat's 46 feet long, about 5 feet wide, and 1/4 of a fathom deep. Now, who could tell me what the measure of a fathom is? Anybody know what a fathom is? The depth? Yeah, it's a depth. So a fathom is actually 6 feet. Just so every fathom is 6 feet. So 1/4 of a fathom works out to about 18 inches. Which is about how much a dragon boat is in the water. And I just like to share that just as if you're having conversations with other folks that are, say, on the water with you, they may use the fathom measure. So it's just helpful to know kind of what that is. Couple of nice pictures. I think maybe there's a few here that we might see some of the folks with us, but this is an example of us actually returning back towards our boathouse after a paddle coming back from the city. This is an evening paddle with us going into the city, and that's Randy's wife Cynthia as our drummer on the front. Yes, and we were headed into town last summer actually to watch the fireworks. So we left about 8 o'clock, something like that at night, and it was a beautiful sunset. So today, though, we're really here to talk about assessing hazards and mitigating risks. And as I mentioned, I'd really like to make this kind of a group discussion for everybody because I do think some of what we're going to share today will be helpful for the group, but I also feel it's very important that we actually learn from one another. And so I built in a little exercise for us to do. And so I think, Tim, we didn't practice this about trying to go out to the YouTube, but we'll just go ahead and go through the PowerPoint today, and then we can link in the YouTube afterwards. So, all right. So for the audience that's on with us today, how many folks have actually in their home organization, their clubs, actually undergone a drill where you deliberately capsize the boat, capsize the vessel? Show of hands. Okay. So I think this is one of these exercises, and it's great to see so many people on the call today actually raising their hand that they've conducted this. But I think if there's a key takeaway is you should absolutely do it. You've got to be planned, you got to plan it, and you've got to walk people through how to go about it so that people understand what you're going to do. But it is inevitable at some point. The more time we're on the water, the more likelihood is that we're actually going to encounter a capsized experience. And so preparing for it in advance is the best way to mitigate some of the hazards that are associated with it. And so one of the hazards I wanted to share with you is, let me make sure I didn't, yep, okay. One of the hazards is obviously paddlers in the water, right? So the boat capsizes, paddlers are in the water, equipment's in the water, everything that was in the bottom of the boat is now either floating or being contributed to the fish as a coral reef, if you will, for them to enjoy later on in time. So keys and glasses and cell phones, anything that's not, if you will, attached to the vessel or attached to the paddler is now fish food. So, but today's effort is really about understanding the hazard. And so I like to use this particular image because the boat floats. And I think those that have done the drill understand that. But it's very important to understand that there's a tremendous amount of air that is now trapped underneath the hull of a boat, which is important to understand because when we do our drill, one of the things we do is we actually try to go underneath the hull so that paddlers can, in fact, spend a moment under the hull of the boat and get acquainted with the environment of what it's going to look like. It's typically very bright. It's somewhat translucent. There's plenty of air there, and getting the comfort level of capturing your breath, not panicking, getting calm, and then taking a deep breath and coming back from underneath the boat, coming up out of the water is important. Okay, so a show of hands, folks that are on the call, have you, when you've done this drill, have you in fact gone under the boat to experience underneath the hull? Show of hands. Okay, so not as many folks that are on our call today, although you've done the drill. I would encourage you the next time you do your drill, be planful, take some time, and get everybody, get the experience. Certainly, at a minimum, the steers person has to go under the hull. That's a requirement in the training that we do. And the reason for that is the steers person is responsible for the crew in the boat, and you need to get underneath the hull and inspect to make sure that there's no one under the boat trapped for whatever reason. Could be that the tow lines that you have, whatever the case might be, has sort of bound that individual, and maybe they're stuck. Could be they're panicking. They're not familiar with the environment. This is the first time it's happened to them. So your job as a steers person, it's mandatory that you go under the hull, and so you want to practice that as a steers person. Okay. Any questions on sort of this particular scenario or image?
It's very interesting. I agree entirely with what you're saying and people understanding what goes on and the fact they can survive under the hull. we have a slightly different procedure, and there are elements of right in that we encourage people to identify their buddy, stay with the boat, float, acclimatise to the water, and once they've done that, we only go looking for people who are missing. So the emphasis, it's the same, but the emphasis is on them taking responsibility for their partner, their buddy, us taking responsibility as boat captains or helms or coaches for the group, and then only going looking for paddlers afterwards. It's a variation on the same theme, but I'm quite interested in getting people used to doing that, so because there's a lot of mythology and fear around under the boat, so it's worth doing as a set piece exercise. So learned something already. Brilliant.
Good, great. Well, I'm glad you actually brought that up, Tim, because we absolutely, if this was in fact a capsize, the very first thing we would be doing is counting off. Yes. So if you think about it, right, we've counted off once we've gotten settled into the boat at the dock. We've counted off and we've given a safety announcement that helps people pair up and understand you're working with your seatmate, and who's going to be responsible for the stern, who's going to be responsible for the drummer, so that everybody's kind of clear on that. And then obviously the very first step in this stage would be to count off and make sure that we in fact have everyone. And so when we in fact last summer encountered, oh sorry, go ahead. Yes.
Oh yeah. Go.
Oh, I thought there was a question. Sorry. But last summer when we had an unexpected capsize, we did in fact have someone under the hull, and the counting off was very important so that we could in fact identify. There were 22 people in the boat, and so by doing the count, we understood that we were missing actually 2 people, because one person had started to actually swim away from the boat, and so didn't hear the instructions to actually be counted or to count off. So very important to count. Very important to count.
Was that, out of interest, was that a corporate crew, or is it a new crew, or a regular training crew?
It was a very new crew. We actually had we had 10 experienced club member paddlers, and we had 10 guests.
Right.
And it was, obviously, it was our guests that weren't aware of what to expect and what to do. Our club members did a great job of actually, pairing up, gathering with them, making sure they were safe, and they were all folks that were sailors. They were all comfortable with the water and being in the water. So interestingly enough, they were probably overly comfortable being in the water, in the sense that they're like, oh yeah, this happens all the time. We just swim to a nearby vessel and climb on board. Whereas our procedure typically is to stay with the vessel, stay with the dragging line. So let me advance the slide here to our second slide. So now you imagine that you have the boat upright. One of the hazards that you might be facing is hypothermia. And obviously in this particular case, you can tell it's probably more like summertime because people are in shorts. But depending on where you all, paddle out of, water temperature can be very important, and hypothermia can be an issue. And even if the ambient air temperature is high and warm enough for shorts, you may find that the water, certainly below 12, 18 inches, can get rapidly cold. And so people's lower extremities may start to get numb sooner than they actually expect. So that can be something that you just need to prepare the group for. Any other hazards that you see here? Just inviting the group to participate. So if you want to raise your hand and take yourself off mute, I'm curious if you see any other potential hazards that we might be looking at.
Just while we're going through that, we normally talk about hypothermia as being 15 degrees Celsius, but that depends on the age, condition, it depends on the size of the individual, all sorts of things, the wind chill. And so, I mean, before hypothermia is cold water shock. And this, if you just took away the cold water shock, And the natural reaction, if you think about it, if you had a shock, if somebody shocked you suddenly, the first thing you do was take a sharp intake of breath. And that is a bit of a human being design fault, because that sharp intake of breath, if you happen to be underwater at the time, is going to induce a little bit of panic. So whilst hypothermia is absolutely a killer, so is cold water shock. So in fact, there was a kid, a child this week, I think, or last week, who had gone to a lifeboat, British lifeboat, Royal Naval Lifeboat Institution talk, and remembered it, ended up falling off a boat and just floated. And he floated for a long period until they found him. And when asked what he was doing, they said, well, I was just following the instructions. So the instruction there is, they say, float to live. Bit counterintuitive. Right. You end up in the water, and the first thing you do is maybe start scrabbling around if you're away from a boat. Of course, the routine is to just float, just try and relax, acclimatise to the water, and then switch your brain on. But this kid was 10 years old or something. It was really quite impressive. Anyway, but that's another point about, on that subject, but hypothermia in cold water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other?
Some hazards I see, you know, the tiller. Whenever we turn that tiller, whenever we turn that boat, we turn it such that the tiller goes under the water versus over. Because when you see that tiller there, if that hits someone, someone can get injured. Another thing is the life vests. We make sure that the life vests are snug.
Yeah.
People tend to, when they go in the water, the life vest will want to pull up, and they'll put their arms up, and the life vest will come off. So just making sure that that the paddlers know that, one, we ask them to keep it snug enough so that it doesn't inhibit their paddling. But two is when they fall in the water, keep your arms down so that life vest doesn't tend to go over your head.
Yeah.
Yep. That's great, Randy. Great. Thank you. Other comments, other observations? I think we've hit a couple of them here. You know, that's, I think, one of the trainings to sort of be developing when identifying hazards is sort of taking the time to actually look at the environment, right? And so, you know, one of the things that we learn too is we have people that are obviously moving in the boat that are bailing water out, and you know, they're trying to move as much water out as they possibly can, as quickly as they can, and sometimes they're throwing the water on top of the people that are actually in the water, which is not necessarily ideal. And so a little bit of the hazard there is getting the balance right so that everybody can sort of support the boat, avoid more water obviously going into the boat so we can bail it, but also making sure that we're not dumping water on top of the paddlers that are in fact in the water.
John, are those bailers, whether they're, I'm not quite, I think they are buckets of some description, are they tied up to the boat?
They're not. And interestingly enough, we actually did this by design because we wanted to test and see what in fact would happen. Would the bailers actually sink, or would they in fact sort of stay close enough and float with the equipment in the boat? And for the most part, they, yeah, I think we might have had, for this drill, I think we had 3 bailers or 4 bailers. I think we might have lost 1. But the others, typically air got captured enough that when stuff floated back up to the surface, they were there. Right. So you could, in fact, make a decision to tie them into the boat. Most of us don't do that when we have bailers. We just sort of free leave them floating around. But it's probably not a bad idea to in fact try to attach them some way with enough string, but not so much string that it causes people to get tangled.
Yeah, I've seen also in outrigger paddling where they've got the upright, the posts, where you've got a Velcro. Yeah. Now you wouldn't tie on all your bailers, but at least 1 or 2 of the larger ones are Velcroed on. So in the event of a capsize, you're going to have at least 1 or 2 bailers should you need them. But like I say, just another.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Well, I'm glad Randy sort of brought up the tiller, because I zoomed in on this for that exact reason. Is that tiller is moving pretty quick when you're rotating the boat. So I zeroed in. The picture is obviously a little bit grainy, but you've got to be careful about the tiller when you rotate the boat over. So just be aware of it. Make sure that people know where it is, and that you know, you just don't get struck by it. So
I just have to say, John, with the tiller,
I did get hit with it on my top lip. It was not a planned capsize. It did happen, genuinely. And I was on the last bench. And, you know, the helm went in and I kind of followed. And I got hit by the helm stick on my top lip. So, yes, they are a hazard.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so that, I'm glad you brought that up because the natural instinct for the helms person is to start to try to dive into the water to kind of get away from the boat.
Yeah.
But it's actually our obligation to actually ride the boat down.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the you're the captain of the ship, and if the ship's going down, you have to go down with it. And part of going down with it means you actually have to hold on to the tiller to avoid what you just described.
Right.
Not most helms would. Your natural reaction is to not do that, but it's important that you actually hold on to it so you know where it is, and then surface to minimize the impact or hazard for other paddlers.
I think you're absolutely
By
right.
the way,
Sorry.
Tim.
No, go, Eleanor, go.
By the way, quick question. Can I just go back a little bit?
Yeah.
If you capsize and when you number off, what procedure do you use? How do you do it when you number off after a capsize?
We start with the whoever was number one in the seating arrangement, whether
Yes.
that was the drummer or perhaps somebody in the first row. Right. They'll call out. So the sterns person will yell, count off.
Okay.
As a command. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you'll hear 1, 2, etc. through the boat. Now,
Because we have something slightly different.
okay.
Either the coach or the command person will shout 1, and then number 1 will reply 1, and then the command person will 2, and then number 2 will reply 2, and that way we know that number 1, number 2, they're okay, and we continue with that.
Oh, that's great.
I'll discuss in a minute. I always have a problem with that mentally, even though it's never happened before. I have a question. We'll come back to it perhaps in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, what Eleanor's talking about there is it's a question and answer. So the question is 1, are you okay? Are you still alive? Are you paying attention? So all that is encapsulated into one word, 1. Yeah. Otherwise, they'll say yes, okay, whatever. So 1, said assertively, identifies that number 1 is 1, alive, conscious, sentient, listening and responding. That came about because I had an incident some years ago where I had 2 people called out number 13, and the reason they called it out is because the person who was next to number 12 genuinely forgot their number, so they thought they must be number 13. This is the whole idea of adding intelligent people to water, and the first thing they forget is everything. So that's just one of those little experiencing. So we do it that way for that reason. But like I say, always
that's great. We'll take that away. I think that's a that's a really great takeaway. So thanks for sharing both that, Eleanor and Tim. Really appreciate it. I think that's part of what this is about. So yeah,
absolutely.
We talked a little bit about the hazard. One of the hazards, obviously, is when you're flipping the boat back over again, there can be the hazard of in fact getting hit by the boat. And so you just gotta be careful about it. We tend to try to congregate people at the bow and the stern area while we're rotating the boat. So while we're right-siding it, and then, we then try to divide. So the people that are on the stern, they'll go up the port side. The people that are at the bow, they'll go down the starboard side or left or right, depending on what terminology you use, so that there's some clear instruction. And that way we try to get an even number of people on both sides of the boat. So let me ask the group, when you have a boat in this position where your paddlers are in the water, the boat's right side up, you can see we've sort of started here to gather some of the equipment, and we're putting the paddles that were floating inside the boat. Who do you put in your boat first? who do you typically put inside the vessel first? Yes, go ahead, Eleanor.
The lighter person, the person who's lighter, less kilos.
Yep. Okay. Good. Anyone else have similar experience? Yep. Okay. So we actually do that as well, with one minor adjustment. When the vessel is low in the water like this, if we know that we have someone who's with us that's a little larger, then we will actually put them in the boat as well at this point.
Okay.
And the reason for that is it minimizes how high above the gunwale they have to climb to get in the boat.
Oh, yeah.
And also how much the boat is actually going to sort of drop on the side as they're climbing in. And then once they're in the boat, then obviously they start bailing as well. But we've tried it a couple of different ways. We had tried having our largest people be the last people in the boat, and our experience was that as they were climbing back into the boat, we ended up taking on a lot of water. So we adjusted our procedure so that depending on the crew, we will try to get a larger person if we know that person typically maybe needs a little additional support or help or something like that. So just the takeaway that we've experienced.
Okay.
Here's a little close-up, obviously more of the bailing that's going on. We've got more people in the boat. You see what I'm talking about. The boat's now starting to really come up out of the water.
Yeah.
But it's also, you know, at the same time it's coming up out of the water, it's also going, you know, we're getting more people in the water. So it is sitting a little bit lower in the water. But in this particular case, the last people we were actually extracting from the water were the lightest people. And the reason for that was they had the least amount of impact on the boat actually moving from port to starboard. And of course, when the boat's moving port to starboard and the water in the boat starts to slush a little bit, you kind of get this magnifying effect. So conventional wisdom is lightest person in first. We've actually found that going the other direction actually is beneficial from a stability perspective. So just for what it's worth.
Would you get, I appreciate you're close to the bank here, and I appreciate this is an exercise. Yeah. There are some countries that I know that paddle way offshore, but accepting that most of our dragon boat operations training is going to take place fairly close to shore, would you load everybody else back in the boat, or would you start paddling for shore as soon as you could?
Sorry. Yes. Yeah, that's we actually practiced that on this particular body of water after we sort of got in, even though there was a lot of water still in the boat. Yeah. We paddled actually just getting the boat to a position where it was against the dock.
Yeah.
And then interestingly enough, I didn't get pictures of it, but there was a boat ramp, and what we did was we brought the boat up onto the boat ramp, and then hoisting it out of the water allowed the water to actually run out the stern of the boat.
Yeah.
So very, very efficient way of doing it if you're close to an area like that. And so that was an enhancement actually that a friend of ours, Rodney, had actually sort of observed and said, you might want to think about trying that once or twice just to practice it. So depending on the environment you're in, that's a great way to quickly empty the boat.
Yeah, I mean, because the other thing is, I know every having done a number, every capsize is different for all sorts of reasons. But we did an exercise a few years ago, maybe 2 years ago, where we had a swamped boat and we managed to get 16 people back into the boat before bailing, before it really started to sink. And after that, we thought, well, if it's a cold day, the priority really is to get people's body temperatures up again, stave off hypothermia, etc., etc. So as soon as the boat started rising, we had people hanging onto the boat, swimming and kicking, others paddling and still bailing. And as we went on, we got more people on board. Now, I appreciate in a situation like this, it's a training situation, and it's just one of those things that we thought would be a good idea, given them that you wouldn't be too far away from the shore. It's very hard to paddle a boat where people are hanging onto it. At least you're moving slowly but surely ever towards safety and the shore. That's just an observation that came out, but every situation is different, of course.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. I think the one other thing to just share here too is, again, as the steers person, you're the last person in the boat. So you know, it's a good, to your point about the water temperature and hypothermia and cold shock and all those things. You know, being aware of what your paddlers are feeling and experiencing is important. So, you know, also being the last person in the boat and being the person that's in charge also makes it a little bit more difficult too. So you know, sort of to get when the bailing's going on, it's very noisy, and so the people at the bow of the boat have a very difficult time hearing what's being said unless you talk loudly enough or you establish a relay. So it's it's pretty. There's a lot going on.
Question.
So, go ahead.
Has anyone discovered an elegant way of getting onto the boat without taking a dive?
Yes, great question. Great question. So the best way that we've noticed to get onto the boat is well, two things. One is if you've got the boat relatively balanced and you can manage, is as the person in the water is kicking and sort of thrusting themselves up over on top of the gunnel, is for someone that's inside the boat to be grabbing them under their armpit and to hoist them into the boat. Now, that works, and one of the reasons why we actually will typically try to do our lightest paddlers that way is because it's really easy to sort of hoist them into the boat at the last minute. If it's a male and slightly larger male, then generally what we'll try to do is have them put one of their feet onto the side of the gunnel.
Yeah.
Okay. And we will try to roll them into the boat. That's a very efficient way of getting them in. Because sometimes trying to get them up, and depending on how big the life vest is, vests like the clips love to get caught on the side of the gunnel as you're trying to climb into the boat. So, but yeah, that's putting your feet over the side, 1 foot over the side, and then hoisting yourself is a great way to do it. So good question. Yeah, no problem. Great question.
Coach, we also we also did we had a person on one side of the boat in the water, and the other person who's trying to get into the boat, we had the reach over and cross our hands to give them support. So in other words, the person on the other side of the boat reaches out, grabs their hand, and gives them a support point that they can pull up on.
Yeah, that's a great. I'm glad you brought that up, Randy. Especially when there's when there's nobody in the boat itself. It's a great way to get a couple of people in the boat very quickly, is to start pairing up and reaching across and pulling each other in. So yeah, that was a great reminder. Thanks, Randy. So I think one of the things I just wanted to touch on here is a cycle that's called the Deming cycle. Many people probably know it. It's a continuous improvement methodology, which basically says, plan what you're going to do, go out and try it, do it, observe what happened, so check, and then adjust or act on your plan. So take that feedback, put it back into your plan, go out. So today's discussion has been a great example of that, because we'll take something away for the way in which we actually count out at the beginning once we're in the boat. So just something to kind of keep in mind. So it's commonly called plan, do, check, and adjust, or plan, do, check, act. But it's the Deming cycle. It's been around for a long time, but it's just something I wanted to reference. I think a couple of the things that we've taken away is, when we do our steers training, is we provide very specific instructions to the steers on what to do. I mentioned about checking with the buddy system and the air pocket. making sure that obviously everybody's wearing proper seasonal attire. And then, you know, in the wintertime when we're indoors, we do pool paddling. So we do a swim, we do a swim drill inside the pool just to make sure we're familiar with where everybody's capability is. When we actually do this drill, the first thing we do is we let the local authorities know we're going to do it. Inevitably, we're in a park, and all we need is somebody to see what we're doing, not realize it's a drill, and they start calling the emergency people on 911 or whatever. And so we try to make sure the local folks know what's going on. We will have a second team deployed so that in the event something does in fact happen to somebody, we've got a way of trying to help, you know, provide some safety. But before we even go in the water, we're going to actually do a land walkthrough maybe 1 or 2 times, make sure everybody understands what the drill is. And then we're going to go out and we're actually going to literally, you know, capsize the boat. We're going to right it. We're going to enter back into the vessel, and then we're going to return to the dock. An experience that we had when we had the unplanned capsize was the effect it had on some of our paddlers psychologically about people being trapped under the boat. And so we found the American Red Cross actually offers for free a trauma and emotional recovery program. So just something to be aware of. If you have an experience and you find your paddlers are having some nightmares or are fearful of going back out on the water, it's probably something that you want to kind of work with them on and get your arms wrapped around as quickly as you can. And there's resources like the American Red Cross to help you with that.
It's a really interesting point, this, because when the British system and what became the IDBF system was written 30 years ago, it had a section about getting trapped under the boat. And that actually informed, and actually it created more fear than it should have done. Because what people always ask about is, am I going to get trapped on the boat? Now, I personally, this is just me personally, I've only ever known 2 people end up under the boat. One was my pink champagne, my pink team. And what happened was we turned the boat over and we did it very docile, very slow. And even though common sense said to this lady, and we laugh about it now, but it's very interesting in terms of human psychology. The boat was turning over. She tried to stay in the boat because at that point, safety to her meant in the boat. And in fact, I was reminded of this morning, a friend of mine, Orit, in Israel, sent me a capsized video that they did where somebody managed to, everyone fell out and she stayed back in again. And the learning point is she actually inadvertently put in a brace stroke. She didn't know what a brace stroke was, but she did it anyway and stayed in. And the second person who ended up under the boat was somebody who was a bit, I mean, not the most intelligent thing. She thought she would go back under the boat to see if I noticed. And guess what? I did. But apart from that, that's just, you know, but that just, the case in point is you count off whichever system you use. If somebody's missing, who's missing? Number 3, where's number 3? Don't know. You go and get them. And you assist them fairly robustly to come out of the boat.
Yeah.
But that's, but like I say, I've spoken to, even though I haven't personally experienced that, I know a number of people who had, so it's very worthwhile discussing it as a possibility. But it's about pitching it at the right level where you create knowledge and understanding, right, and mitigation of a risk rather than fear.
That's right. And the interesting thing was that our experience, the psychological piece, was that everybody that had actually, in fact, done our drills, you know, that was in the 10 people we had in the boat were all experienced. They had all gone through and done capsize drills. In fact, some of them had done maybe 3, 4, 5 times the capsize drill. So, so very comfortable. But it was the fact that they were worried about the guest paddlers we had, and seeing them under the boat. What was something that we didn't expect. So anyway, just passing along. Be aware of it. Know there's resources that are out there in your local area, and everybody's willing to help. And so we ended up having a couple-hour counselor session as a group, as a club, just to talk about it and get everybody's feelings out. And it was very, very helpful, such that it was more about the team saying, hey, we need to make doing these drills mandatory, as opposed to the safety team saying, we want it to be mandatory, but you just kind of like, that's probably best practice. But now the team was like, hey, you know what? We need to make these drills mandatory because we want everybody to be aware of what the experience is.
Could I just say that one of the things we found is that when we were, let's say, warning people or telling people that we would be doing a drill, the majority of them, all of a sudden, they had other things to do, and they wouldn't turn up. And it's very difficult then to, ensure that the idea was to have 2 mandatory capsize drills per year, hopefully one in the sea and one in the dam, because obviously, the water is, buoyancy is different, and just to experience both of those. And then we found over a period of time, not necessarily this particular club where I am at the moment, but the first one I was with several years ago, then you would find that people would be with the club 2 or 3 years and they would never experience a capsize drill. So the temptation always was to say, make sure you have dry clothing in your car and then just, do a drill on that day, and they wouldn't have a choice.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, it's the fear that people have.
I think you mentioned a point which is actually pretty universal. The way we've addressed this, and there's other ways, is we make all water safety into almost a game. So you have a water safety fun day.
Yeah. And
you go through all the drills in a relaxed environment, a learning environment. You have to do it in warm weather, of course. The whole idea of telling, just throwing somebody in the deep end. I mean, you've got to sort of start off simple and build it up. So I wouldn't go out and take a boat 500 meters offshore, Limassol, and then turn it over and say, get out of that. You've got to take it up in stages. And it's exactly what John's talking about. I think it's great that if you're concerned about what happens under the boat, go and have a look. And once people say fear, future expectations appearing real. It's a big airspace. You're not going to live there for 72 hours, but you can survive under it. And once you've been there, you're not worried about as much or at all. And just take it up in bite-sized increments. Of course, that's going to take time. But
you're absolutely right. We even had capsize drills where people could actually stand.
Yes, yeah.
Where they were not out of their depth, so that they could see that it was, how it would work. And then, as you say, you work, you progress with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I did that with my pink team because most of those have got upper body compromises, operations, lymphedema, etc., etc. Yeah. So, like I say, you couldn't call that a full capsize. You take that up. That's stage 1 of maybe 2 or 3 stages. But absolutely, yes. Thank you, John. Yeah, cheers.
No, that's this is great. We actually have that issue, and I think every club does. And so what we try to do is we try to keep track of the people that have done the drill, and so that we can be aware of those that haven't. But one of the things that we've started to do, because we're doing a lot of OC work right now, is we're trying to ease people in with doing a huli in their OC1.
Yeah.
And so, interestingly enough, if you're going to use the club's OC, in this case, we have an OC2. If you're going to use the club's OC equipment, you actually have to go out and huli and then recover. And so, my wife and I went out, Kathy and I went out and we hulied and we recorded the recovery and we posted it to the private Facebook club site that we have, so that our members could go out and watch us, sort of get an idea of an understanding of what's involved. But we ran a time trial back at the end of July. We had some folks come in and visit from other Midwest clubs that had been paddling in OC for a couple of years and never actually hulied. Wow. Which is amazing that actually while you're paddling, you haven't actually hulied. But before we would let them go do the time trial, they had huli.
Really?
And so afterwards, this one person came up to me and said, "Hey, you know what? I'm really, really glad you did that. I'm going to make sure I take it back to my club because, you know, it really is important that you understand, you know, how to recover the OC, how to get back in the OC, and how to resume paddling." So, but
I think you're absolutely right. What tends to happen a lot is if you come, we mentioned this last week, if you come into dragon boat from canoe or kayak, I think this is fairly universal. Early on in your kayaking or canoeing or paddling career, you learn how to capsize, huli a boat and safe recover yourself and the boat. If you come into dragon boating straight off, that doesn't always happen.
that's right.
So people don't even have the basic understanding or awareness. This is just one of the faults maybe of the system.
Yeah. I would love to be able to figure out how I can get the OC1 inside the indoor swimming pool in the winter to actually do the capsize drill there. But I haven't figured out how to do that without cutting it in half in order to get it, which sort of defeats the purpose.
Absolutely.
So another example of a hazard that we have is actually falling into the water or stuff falling in the water. And so I don't know if others have an experience similar to this. That particular picture is almost unusual. That the water's like glass. There's hardly any wind. You get a false sense of security that you can leave stuff on the dock. And Chicago tends to be the windy city, not because of our politicians, but because we get there aren't any mountains to sort of stop the wind coming across the plains. And so stuff does tend to go in the river, and your instinct is to sort of run after it. So we had to develop a process by which we battened down all the equipment and tucked it away inside the storage sheds when we would go out to practice. One of the things that we're concerned about is obviously making sure everybody has a life vest on. So you've got to put a vest on. We do a buddy system to make sure that the clasps are right. We've added after talking with Tim, we've added a throw line on the dragon boats. And then I already talked about the secure items. But, you know, we have a safety plan, and we actually publish the safety plan. It's on our website. Folks can go out and pull down a copy of it if you like. Feel free to copy it word for word. We're happy for it to be plagiarized. No need to start from scratch, but I would suggest that after you get it, you start to adapt it for your local environment and make the tweaks that are necessary. But we post a copy of this at the boathouse. It's right down on the dock. And generally once a month, the first Saturday or Sunday of practice for that month, we take a moment, maybe 5 minutes, and we just remind the paddlers that it's their responsibility to know the safety plan. So the safety plan is there from the safety team's perspective, but it is incumbent upon paddlers to take responsibility and own this themselves, and to be familiar with what is in the safety plan. And if there's something there that they notice is missing, then they can certainly add to it. But very important that there's transparency for what your safety plan is, and that it's available to be seen and referred to on an ongoing basis.
I think you're absolutely 100% correct there, because firstly, it has to be a live document, as you say, rather than the rusty old or dusty old document never reads. And the second thing, that safety is a partnership thing. It's not decreed, on tablets of stone from on high. It's something that you should be engaged with. And I'm really pleased that your first point is wearing a PFD. We would say more a buoyancy aid rather than the life vest, but the sentiment is there. So important. Absolutely so important. And people think, well, I'm a great swimmer, I don't need one. Don't realise they jump in the water, cold water shock. Guess what? You can't swim anymore. You get injured. You can't swim anymore. But treading water with a buoyancy aid, trying to sort yourself out, is just so much easier for a bit of discomfort in the hot weather. And it really is. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring this picture up because I wanted to just highlight, you know, something that we all probably see day in and day out. This is the gangway going from the side of the bank, obviously, onto our dock. The dock is a floating dock that we partner with the Chicago Rowing Foundation. That small blue storage locker in front of us is on the inside of that blue door is where we actually tape the safety plan. And so it is literally right there. In fact, when Randy and I first started out, we met with the Coast Guard. We were at a safety meeting, and we were talking with the commander in charge of the U.S. Coast Guard for the Midwest, and we explained what we were doing, and she said, "Oh, I'd like to come out and take a look at that." I said, "Please, we would love for you to come take a look at what we're doing, because while we're committed to doing things the best we possibly can, your experience is going to be that much more." And I think she was a little bit shocked, like we would invite her to come help us, in essence, because so much when you think about dealing with officials, you typically tend to think about, oh my goodness, are all our ducks in a row? Is our paperwork set? And do we have, you know, all the proper procedures? And our experience has been that they've been very willing to help us. So.
Yes.
What other hazards do you see in the pictures on the left or the right? And Tim, do we know who, we have someone who's called in, but their video's not on, and I'm not able to tell who that is. I want to make sure that they feel included in participating in the question.
I will send a message.
Okay.
John, I see the leaves. They can be very slippery.
Yes, very good. Very good. Any other hazards that you see?
Well, the surface is uneven, you know, the wood, so you can easily sort of, you know, just catch the edge of the slats of wood.
Yes.
And the danger to load the danger to load the boats once they are one next to each other.
Yeah. Yeah, and they have a little bit of water in them too, don't they?
Yes, they do, actually.
So before we can even go out, we actually have to bail the boats. But yes, you guys have caught a number of the hazards, that's for sure. And so, interestingly enough, the gangway has treads on it, which is designed to prevent you from slipping. But exactly what you talked about is most of our paddlers, because of the water shoes we wear, we actually do trip more frequently going down the gangway. So we try to remind people to hold on to the rails as they're going down. The dock itself has water on it, as you can see already, and so that wood is like ice. It is slippery as ice, and when you get water between your water shoes and the wood, just that little bit, you're hydroplaning. So we've had a number of people wipe out on the dock, even though yeah. So it's really a challenge for us. We've tried to cut down on the amount of water we put on the dock by actually adding in this $45 coyote that tends to keep the geese away. And so when the geese poop is gone, we don't have to mop the dock, which minimizes the slipperiness. It actually makes the environment a lot nicer as well, quite frankly. But that's been a big one. So if you don't have one, you can get them. I forget where we ended up getting it, but we found it online. It was $45. It's the best $45 that we call him Coyote Steve. Steve was the person from our club that bought the boat.
John, the arrangement you have here is absolute luxury to what we have in Cyprus. Seriously, you should see the hazards that we have to go through.
Oh my.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
But isn't it strange that, I mean, something like this, we don't have coyotes. I'm sure we'd have like a sparrowhawk or something in the UK. Right. But I run in other years, a certain number of youth events. And apart from the slip hazards, if I'm running an event for kids, if the place is basically full of goose crap, nobody wants to get in the boat. So the first job of the day, because the geese live there 95% of the time, I operate there for a day or so, 20 days or whatever. But it's interesting that once you cleared it off, keeping it off. And until I saw this, I never thought about actually some sort of measure to keep the geese away, because the geese can go anywhere.
Oh yeah,
brilliant. That is brilliant.
The one real hazard in Cyprus is flip-flops on the dock.
Yes.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we actually require that we won't let you on with flip-flops. You actually have to have a protected toe, something that's attached, water shoe. And honestly, the main reason for that is while this is the river, and our dock is the north dock, so there's a south dock that literally comes off the back end. We actually had someone fall in off the side of the dock on the south dock, not associated with us. And unfortunately, the tree limbs and some of the other debris that's under the water surface tangled the individual. Didn't have a life vest on and succumbed to the water. More likely because of what you talked about, the cold shock piece, Tim, which is when you fall in, you take that initial breath. And it was a tragedy because it was a volunteer group that was trying to put floating plants and shrubs along the river to help clean the water up. And they were doing something that was great for our environment overall. And it's a shame what happened, but it's the water. You just can't take things for granted. And I think that's been a big learning for us. So what do you guys see as the hazard in this particular picture? What are some of the hazards that are obvious here?
Well, steering sitting down.
Okay.
No paddlers.
No paddlers, that's true. Yeah.
They're not going to get very far.
Yeah.
The water looks freezing cold.
Yes, it is. Pretty darn choppy.
Is that boat underway in terms of being towed or being moved? Because
yes, it is.
The boat is articulation. I know with if you talk about outrigger and you can put 2 planks across, so instead of having an army, you've got a twin hull V12. And I've never seen this work effectively as a dragon boat piece unless you've got some method of a fixed member that holds the boats together. Otherwise, they're going to behave like a W.
Right. Yeah. In this particular case, we're actually towing the boats.
Right.
We're towing them at the beginning of the season. Randy's probably in the launch, steering the launch, powering it up river. This is part of the Chicago River that is a little bit south of Chinatown. So it tends to be a lot of commercial traffic. You see a barge there in the background, and it tends to the water's moving pretty quickly in this area, mostly because the water is going south and the wind is blowing north.
Right.
And so you end up with some really, really turbulent water environments. But so I thought I would do a little drill with the group, which is just talk about a hazard framework. So when you're building your safety plan, you want to be thinking about this kind of framework. And so best practice is you identify what the hazard is, you identify the sub-hazard, you identify severity, the frequency by which this could happen, and then you outline your control measures. So if we go back for a moment, what is one of the hazards that these guys are facing right now? So think about the hazard and the sub-hazard.
Certainly from what you described, wind and waves. So the choppiness of the water.
Right. Yep. Swamping from wind and weight. Yep, exactly. That's the, there's many hazards in that picture, by the way, but let's just say for the sake of argument that swamping, if we came across a commercial craft, which Randy will tell you the first time we did this, we did, and those barges put off really big wakes, very, very big wakes. And when you're you know, sort of 2 feet off the water, a 2-foot wake is pretty intimidating. So immersion's the subhazard, one of the subhazards. There's others. Now, if we go back, what do we think? Is it a major or a minor hazard? I kind of gave you the answer, but
I would say it's major.
major? Okay, why? Tell me more.
Well, because actually, because of it's very cold. So if the steerers fell in, and I assume they're wearing life vests, even though I don't really see them. Perhaps they have them under their coats. I don't know.
Yeah.
They wouldn't last very long in the water. They would have a problem with that.
Yep. So immersion, that's okay. So that's great. Great feedback. So yeah, I think initially we were thinking it was minor, but I think your point of view, because it's winter time, should probably change that to major. So great. Yep.
And
When you
also
think about
the amount of clothing they're wearing, they wouldn't be able to float
right.
if they've got
Right.
boots on and things like that.
Yeah, no, that's a great perspective. That's really great. So we'll change that. The frequency, obviously, you wouldn't know, but we do this twice a year. We do it at the beginning of the year in March, and we do it at the end of the year, usually the first weekend in November.
Yeah.
So November's not quite so bad. The water's actually pretty warm. The air is cold. In March, the air is warm, but the water's cold. And they are both wearing life vests, just for the record. It's just that in this case, the left steers person has his jacket on over top of his life vest.
Oh, right. Okay.
Okay. But both of them do have life vests on. But you're right. They're wearing multiple layers, and they are bundled up pretty good and tight because it's a cold trip, and it's about an hour to go from where we put the boats in to get up to the dock. So they're outside. So what we've actually done is we have set up a receiving team for when they get to the dock, which has blankets and hot chocolate and coffee for them. So that as soon as they get to the dock and they come out, we wrap them in blankets, we take them off the dock, and we let them sit down and get warm with blankets and hot beverage. So we've gotten smart over the years.
What's your take on wearing your buoyancy aid life preserver as the outermost item of clothing, as opposed to under a coat or a jacket?
Yeah, I think in this particular case, going forward, we would recommend that everybody have the life vest on the outside of their jacket. I suspect that he had an extra jacket with him, and as he was going along, got colder, and decided to put the jacket on, but not take his vest off to put it on, and then put the vest on the outside. But I do think
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is the point of this, isn't it? It's not being, it's being constructively critical and learning from that. That could cause a problem. I can see why that's happened, but that could cause a problem. And in the same way that Eleanor says, I can see a major hazard there, or major severity, and I can see minor severity, because I can see minor severity because in this case they are sitting down steering, they are well insulated against wind chill. And with nobody else in the boat, there's sufficient freeboard in the boat, so it will deal with bigger waves and ride higher. But I take Eleanor's point as well. So it's the benefit of having different perspectives on the same set of circumstances.
Yeah, and actually, the reason we actually had the steers sitting was to minimize the roll of the boat.
Absolutely.
You know? And so because they are in fact being towed, their job as steering is sort of like a fire truck that's like a hook and ladder, where there's a steering arm at the back, is to do the same thing. So the motorboat is actually steering the main direction, obviously, but they're steering the dragon boat. So anyway, I wanted to introduce this framework because I think from a training perspective, it's important to think about it, the boat speed, adding this shelter, making sure we have the right buoyancy aids, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're not familiar with this framework, this is a great framework. I wanted to mention Kathy Lawson and I, so Kathy's taken the lead on going through all of the different hazards that we have at our club. We have a list, believe it or not, of about 87 different hazards that we are working through on this framework so that we can identify the main hazard, the sub-hazard, the severity, the frequency, and then think about the control measure. So it's a lot of work. We're actually doing this work during the COVID season that we're in right now because it's a great time for us to do it. If we were normally on the water, it would be very difficult for us to have the time available to do it. So just thought I would share a framework. If you have something similar or different and you want to share with us, please share it with Tim and then he can get it back out to the group. But I think it's something that we could all benefit from.
I think you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. I mean, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, John. Carry on.
No, that's all right. I just I wanted to make sure we get enough time for some questions and answers. There's a couple of other hazards that we've identified as along the way. Obviously, over exhaustion, heat stress when we're out paddling, and so we have a mitigating action that we use to be able to address that. You can see, obviously, making sure we have water, making sure that we're adjusting the training plans, those big things. Our particular bank area can have some contamination. So early in the spring, we hold a cleaning environment so that we can remove any sharp objects, nails and rocks and those sorts of things. So maintaining good housekeeping helps keep things good for warm-ups and for the group to just congregate in outside of practice and off the dock. So the idea is everybody used to like to congregate at the end of the gangway right by that small blue locker that we were looking at before. It's not a very large area. So we try to get people after they get their gear to get up onto the land so that they can congregate and socialize.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're all dealing with the pandemic right now. Big campaign for us here in Chicago is well, the professional teams weren't playing; they just started playing. But Tim mentioned the reentry plan. We're actually working on version 4 right now of this plan. So happy to answer any questions that the group has about it. We've had some really amazing experiences as we've been trying to operationalize it. So a big one has been getting comfortable sanitizing the equipment between paddlers. And so not using a spray that would be harmful to the water, but we're just using regular soap and water in a spray bottle. And so that's helped. Most dragon boaters, when we're going in and out of the boat, what do? We lend a helping hand to interlock hands to help pull somebody out of the boat. We've found a way now where you hold on to your paddle handle and the paddle shaft, and you give the blade to your partner if you need to. If you want to help them out of the boat, you do it that way. So, or ideally we do contactless transition. We use an outdoor thermometer, which you got to just make sure you've got the right kind to take everybody's temperature. And then making sure that paddlers have an adequate supply of face masks. So when face masks get wet, if you hoolie or capsize, they don't work. And so we now require everybody to have a spare mask in a Ziploc bag that they take with them.
So are you paddling with masks?
I'm sorry?
Are you paddling with masks?
We are paddling with masks, yes. We are paddling with masks. This picture doesn't show it very well, but everyone in the boat there has a mask on and is paddling with a mask. Great question. I will say one thing about masks. Part of the updated revision that we're working on is to try to help give some guidance on on masks and best practices with masks.
Yep.
There's a lot of different, you know, a lot of different masks that are on the marketplace. Some of them are not actually helpful for what we're doing. And I'll give you a specific example. So a mask that actually has an exhale valve on it is actually not preferred for what we're doing. And the reason for that is that it in essence creates a stronger wind tunnel, which takes your respiratory signature further. So in our updated version, we're going to be sort of talking more about that, but that's just one example of where some masks have a one-way valve. So when you breathe in, you breathe through the fabric, if you will, but when you exhale out through this plume. And we would encourage you not to use those types of masks because of what I said. It creates a stronger respiratory signature, kind of like a beam, if you will, depending on where you're aiming. Okay.
Do I want? Yes.
Yep.
A hot drink, coffee, go.
Is there a question?
The mask you would prefer then would be the material type mask.
Yes. Yeah. A typical cloth mask will be just fine. Yep.
Yeah, I have one here in my bag, like a material one. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, also they're washable as well. So even, you know, if they fall in the water, they're not going to go all soggy. I mean,
Right.
you know, you can wash them as well. I mean, that's probably one of the better reasons.
Yeah, that's great. That's absolutely great. Excellent. And that's an advantage too, right? So being able to wash it, obviously, or frequently use it. But as I said, our key learning here has been the fact that we all now take a Ziploc extra mask with us because if it gets wet.
Okay.
So.
Good idea.
Well, we've learned a lot today on the call from everyone's participation, and certainly thank you for that. I think as safety-minded people and safety-minded paddlers, it's best for us to just keep talking through things. That's how we learn from each other. I'm sure there's many resources that others have in their local area. We have tried to tap into as many resources as we can and to try to learn and to try to share. And through sharing, two things happens. One is there's greater transparency. So in our case, the Coast Guard and the Marine Safety Unit and the Harbor Safety Committee and the Fire Department have gotten more comfortable with what we're doing and that we are trying to do something and that we have plans in place and that we're doing practices and exercises and drills, those sorts of things. And so that helps give them a sense of comfort that when they see us, you know, they know that we're somewhat prepared. We all know that we're not prepared for every scenario. And so when it comes time to need help, then we'll call on these resources to help us. So here's how to get in touch with us if you'd like to send us an email if you have thoughts or questions. We're welcome to for your feedback. Our web address is up there as well. As I mentioned, if you want to get a copy of our safety plan, it's on our website. Feel free to download it, and if you need a soft copy, let me know. We're happy to share that with you as well. I'd like to turn it back over to Tim and say thank you for the opportunity. This has been great, and the discussion has been wonderful, Tim. So let me see if
Can I just ask one question?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
You know, because I'm sorry I joined late, I wasn't here. You know where you mentioned getting out the boat and you're holding hands or you're helping with hands and you're saying you're using soap and water. Surely that's not enough. I mean, I thought we'd been drummed into using alcohol wipes or alcohol or, you know, things like that. I mean, surely the soapy water is not enough.
Well, so maybe I wasn't clear enough. So I apologize if I wasn't. But we actually have two mixtures. We have the sanitizer spray that we use,
Okay.
and then if we're able to, like in an OC case, if we're able to remove the OC out of the water to clean it down in between paddlers, then we're able to use the sanitizer on the land. We're just trying to be mindful of spraying the sanitizer into the water environment, so as to not cause other environmental hazards, if you will. So in some instances, we're not able to move the boat out, so
Right.
we'll also use a rag and the sanitizer spray on the rag, and then wipe the area down.
But my question was more, when were you helping the people out of the boat?
Okay.
And you know, because there is certain people who do need a helping hand, you know, either with age or with injury. So what do we do about that? I mean, you know, it's all about this, we're not supposed to be touching each other, or we should be wearing gloves. I mean, would it be an idea if we all wore a plastic glove or something? I mean,
Well, that's up to each individual. There are some individuals that when we first started practicing on the water, we're wearing gloves. I think we're learning that sometimes you can still transmit the virus by touching and having it on your glove if you don't take the glove off the right way. But I think first and foremost, from a safety perspective, if there's somebody that's in the boat and they need a helping hand to get out of the boat, then we should help them out of the boat so that they don't actually succumb to a further injury, you know, tripping or falling. And then those individuals should just immediately, as quickly as possible, go and wash their hands with soap and water. And if that's not available, use sanitizer, those sorts of things. So I think your question's a great question, because, you know, my point was to say, early on, what we had, our first week of practice on the water, was we had people doing what we have done since we've been on the water, which is reach a hand out, look to grab the other hand, and hoist the person up out of the boat, right? And that was the piece that we were trying to say, hey, if you're able-bodied enough to exit the boat on your own, then try to not do that. But if somebody needs help, we should help.
Right. Okay.
Great question.
John, I have a question, please.
Yes.
But it has nothing to do with health and safety. I noticed on your boats, you have actually marked the benches, which is an absolutely brilliant idea. You numbered the benches, because we find that, you know, you say to the person, you know, I don't know, so-and-so bench 1, so-and-so bench 2, whatever. And then they're beginning to look, you know, where's bench 5 and where's bench 6. So I love the idea that you've actually numbered the benches. And also, if there is a capsize and you need that person to, for whatever reason, to be on bench 6, they can see immediately.
Right.
What have you used to actually number the benches? Is it something laminated that is stuck to the boat, that it doesn't, you know, go on your bottom when you're paddling? What did you use?
Well, I don't know that we've perfected that, quite frankly. We have had a number of people come out of the boat with a number on their bottom. So usually we'll ask number 4, do you mind please returning to the boat so you can put your number back for the next crew. But no, I think the first time we did it, we ended up using like numbers that were fluorescent that would go in a mailbox or sort of on the side of your house. And so I would try those. You might have to experiment with a couple of different kinds.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think we're going to do it in our club, because I really love the idea.
I didn't see that. I didn't see it, but I think it's a brilliant idea, Eleanor. Good.
John, something you mentioned there reminded me of something. In my Land Rover, in my van, I've got one of these. This is a protein powder bottle, but it's the size of the bottle. It's my decontamination kit. Inside, it's got some sponges and some washing up liquid, which is better than bleach. And what I do is, when I use a boat that I share with somebody else, I just wash the boat down. But it just occurred to me that you could put one of these on the dock with a screw top, with some soapy water in it. And then when you come off the dock, to avoid that situation that Debbie's talking about, where you've got that possible cross-contamination, take the lid off, get somebody out the boat, wash your hands, and away you go. It's not going to reduce it to nothing, but it's going to minimise and mitigate it just a little bit. My thanks to John and friends for doing that presentation. Superb, excellent information, very informative, very knowledgeable. This is going to be a challenge, trying to get this message across to people at this point in time, and it surprises me no end that people will come up to me and quietly say, thank you for doing that, thank you for keeping us safe. It doesn't appear to be mainstream, even though we have water safety policies, safe paddling policies aplenty. I'd like to get it mainstream. I'd like to get it out in the open to enhance people's paddling enjoyment, not to diminish it or somehow restrict it. Now, how are we going to move on? I'm going to try and determine the best way, the best format to get this information across. It will be free on YouTube, free to access forever. That's taken for granted, and that will always be the case. But really presenting it in such a way that people will engage with it.